Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the crumpled eviction notice in his calloused hands. The paper felt heavier than a sack of grain, and the words blurred together as his vision clouded with worry. 3 months behind on rent, and now he had 30 days to come up with $12,000 or lose the ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Texas landscape, making the metal roof of his old farmhouse creak and groan. His cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware that their home might soon belong to someone else. Jake had inherited the ranch from his grandfather 2 years ago, along with all its debts and mounting expenses. What seemed like a blessing had quickly turned into a nightmare of endless bills and sleepless nights. He walked slowly toward the barn, his boots kicking up small clouds of red dust with each step. The drought had been particularly harsh this year, forcing him to spend thousands on water and feed for his livestock. The price of beef had dropped just when he needed it most, and his savings had evaporated faster than morning dew in the desert heat. Inside the barn, Jake's prize bull, Thunder, snorted and pawed at the ground. The massive animal had cost him a fortune, but Jake hoped Thunder would help improve his herd and bring in better prices at market. Now even Thunder might have to be sold to keep the ranch afloat for a few more months. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, calling to check on him. She had been like a mother to him since his own parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. Her voice was warm but filled with concern as she asked about the eviction notice she had seen the sheriff deliver earlier that morning. He tried to sound optimistic, telling her he had a plan, but the truth was he felt completely lost. The bank had already refused to extend his loan, and every potential buyer he had contacted for the cattle had offered prices that would barely cover his immediate debts, let alone the back rent. As evening approached, Jake sat on his front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. This was his favorite time of day, when the oppressive heat finally began to fade and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers across the land. He couldn't imagine living anywhere else, but reality was closing in on him like storm clouds on the horizon. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance caught his attention. It was unusual to see riders this late in the day, especially on his property. As the sound grew closer, Jake squinted into the fading light, trying to make out who might be approaching. What he saw made him rub his eyes and look again. A figure on horseback was riding toward his ranch, but something was very wrong with the perspective. The rider appeared to be enormous, far larger than any person should be. As the figure drew closer, Jake realized he wasn't seeing things. The woman approaching on horseback was indeed a giant, easily 12 feet tall, wearing traditional cowgirl attire that looked like it had been crafted by master leatherworkers. Her hat was the size of a wagon wheel, and her boots gleamed in the dying sunlight. The horse beneath her was proportionally large, a magnificent stallion that moved with grace despite its incredible size. Jake felt his heart pounding as the giant cowgirl brought her mount to a stop just outside his fence line. She dismounted with fluid grace, her boots hitting the ground with a sound like distant thunder. Up close, Jake could see that she was strikingly beautiful, with long auburn hair that flowed from beneath her enormous hat, and eyes the color of spring grass. Her smile was warm and friendly, showing perfect white teeth. "Evening," she called out in a voice that was surprisingly gentle despite its power. "I'm looking for Jake Martinez." "Would that be you?" Jake nodded slowly, still not entirely convinced he wasn't hallucinating from stress and exhaustion. The giant cowgirl approached the fence, moving carefully to avoid damaging anything with her massive frame. "My name is Stella Mae Bronson," she said, tipping her enormous hat politely. "I heard you might be having some trouble with rent payments." The casual way she mentioned his most private and embarrassing problem made Jake's cheeks burn with shame. News traveled fast in small communities, but he never expected it to reach the ears of a giant cowgirl who seemed to have stepped out of a tall tale. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't understand," Jake stammered. "How did you know about my situation, and who exactly are you?" Stella Mae's laugh was like music, rich and warm. "I make it my business to know when good folks are in trouble," she explained. "As for who I am, well, that's a longer story. But the short version is that I help people who find themselves in impossible situations." She gestured toward his ranch with one massive hand. "This is a beautiful spread you have here. It would be a shame to see it fall into the wrong hands because of something as simple as money." Jake felt a spark of hope kindle in his chest, though he tried to keep his expectations in check. Are you saying you might be able to help me? Oh, I can definitely help you, Stella May replied with that same mysterious smile. The question is whether you're willing to accept the kind of help I offer. The way she said it made Jake feel both excited and nervous. There was something in her tone that suggested her assistance would come with strings attached, though he couldn't imagine what a giant cowgirl might want from a struggling rancher like himself. As if reading his thoughts, Stella May chuckled. Don't look so worried, Jake. I'm not here to make any deals with the devil, but I do have a proposition that might interest you. The evening air had grown cooler, and Jake invited her to continue their conversation in the morning, when they could both think more clearly. Stella May agreed, saying she would make camp nearby and return at sunrise. As Jake watched her ride away into the darkness, her massive silhouette disappearing into the star-filled sky, he wondered if he had finally lost his mind completely, or if his luck was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. Jake barely slept that night, tossing and turning as his mind raced with questions about the giant cowgirl named Stella May. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see her enormous silhouette against the darkening sky. Part of him wondered if the stress had finally caused him to have a complete breakdown, but the memory felt too real, too detailed to be a hallucination. He was already sitting on his porch with a cup of strong black coffee when the sun began to rise over the eastern hills. The familiar sounds of his ranch coming to life surrounded him, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking in their coop, and the gentle whoosh of wind through the mesquite trees. Everything seemed normal until he heard those unmistakable hoofbeats approaching once again. Stella May appeared over the ridge, her massive form silhouetted against the golden morning sky. This time, Jake was better prepared for the sight, though it still took his breath away. She rode with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle, her posture straight and proud despite her incredible size. "Morning, Jake," she called out cheerfully as she approached. "I hope you slept well." Jake stood up, straightening his worn shirt and running a hand through his disheveled hair. "To be honest, ma'am, I didn't sleep much at all. I kept wondering if you were real or if I was losing my mind." Stella May laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet morning air like church bells. "Oh, I'm real enough. Though I understand your confusion. Most folks don't expect to meet someone like me in their daily lives." She dismounted near the fence, and Jake could see her more clearly in the bright morning light. Her clothes were magnificent. Hand-tooled leather chaps, a shirt that looked like it had been woven from silk and starlight, and boots that gleamed like polished mahogany. Everything about her spoke of wealth and quality, from the silver conchos on her belt to the intricate beadwork on her hatband. "You mentioned last night that you might be able to help me," Jake said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "I have to admit, I'm curious about what you have in mind." Stella May nodded and reached into her saddlebags, pulling out a leather portfolio that was the size of a regular briefcase in her massive hands. "Before we discuss business, Jake, I need to know more about you and this ranch. Tell me about your family's history here." Jake found himself opening up to this strange, magnificent woman in a way he hadn't expected. He told her about his great-grandfather, who had originally settled the land with nothing but determination and a worn-out horse. He spoke of the generations of Martinez men who had worked the soil, raised cattle, and built the ranch into something to be proud of. His voice grew heavy with emotion as he described his parents' death and his own struggles to keep the family legacy alive. The drought, the falling beef prices, the mounting debts, it all poured out of him like water through a broken dam. Stella May listened with genuine interest, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions that showed she understood the complexities of ranch life. "Your family has deep roots here," she said when he finished. "I can see why losing this place would break your heart." "It would be like losing a piece of my soul," Jake admitted. "But I've run out of options. The bank won't extend my loan, I can't sell enough cattle fast enough to cover the debt, and I don't have any other assets worth enough to make a difference." Stella May smiled mysteriously. "What if I told you there was a way to not only save your ranch but make it more profitable than it's ever been?" Jake's heart jumped. "I'd say that sounds too good to be true. Most worthwhile things do," she replied. "But hear me out. I have a business proposition that could solve both our problems." She opened her portfolio and pulled out what looked like architectural drawings and financial projections. In her hands they appeared to be regular-sized documents, but Jake realized they must be enormous originals. I'm in the entertainment business, Jake. Specifically, I create unique experiences for people who want something different from their usual vacation. Think of it as extreme adventure tourism, but with a twist that only someone like me can provide. Jake studied the drawings, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There were plans for what looked like an enormous arena, guest facilities, and something that resembled a rodeo grounds, but on a scale he had never imagined. I don't understand, he said honestly. What does this have to do with my ranch? I want to lease a portion of your land, Stella May explained. Specifically, I need about 500 acres to build a facility where I can offer giant-sized rodeo experiences. Imagine tourists getting to participate in cattle drives where the cattle are the size of elephants, or trying their hand at roping steers that are as big as small buildings. The idea was so outlandish that Jake almost laughed, but the serious expression on Stella May's face stopped him. She clearly believed in what she was proposing. People would pay extraordinary amounts of money for experiences they can't get anywhere else in the world, she continued. I've already done market research and the demand is enormous. Wealthy tourists, adventure seekers, people who want to brag about doing something absolutely unique. They'll travel from all over the globe for this. Jake looked at the financial projections again. The numbers seemed impossible. According to Stella May's calculations, the lease payments alone would be enough to cover his rent, his other debts, and provide him with a comfortable living. But how is this even possible? He asked. I mean, giant cattle? Giant rodeo equipment? Where would you get all of this? Stella May's smile became enigmatic. Let's just say I have access to resources that most people don't. The important thing is that I can make it happen. And I need a partner who understands ranch life and can help manage the day-to-day operations. She pointed to another section of the drawings. Your existing ranch operations would continue unchanged. In fact, they'd probably benefit from the increased infrastructure and the tourists who might want to experience traditional ranching as well. Jake felt his head spinning. It was the answer to his prayers, but it seemed so bizarre that he couldn't quite believe it was real. What would you need from me besides the land? Partnership, Stella May said simply. I know how to handle giant-sized operations, but I need someone who understands regular cattle, regular land management, and how to work with local communities. You'd be my business partner, not just a landlord. The offer was incredible, but Jake had learned to be cautious when something seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? There's always a catch, Stella May laughed. Smart man. The catch is that this would completely change your life. Your quiet ranch would become a major tourist destination. There would be crowds, noise, and publicity. Some of your neighbors might not appreciate the changes, and you'd be working with someone who operates on a scale that most people can't even imagine. Jake looked out over his land, imagining it transformed according to Stella May's vision. It would certainly be different from the peaceful ranching life he had always known. But it would also mean saving his family's legacy and potentially building something even greater. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Of course, Stella May replied. But I should mention that I have other potential partners I'm considering. I chose to approach you first because I liked what I heard about your character and your family's history. But I can't wait indefinitely. She gathered up her drawings and tucked them back into the portfolio. I'll give you 3 days to decide. If you're interested, we can work out all the details and get started immediately. If not, I wish you the best of luck finding another solution to your problems. As she mounted her enormous horse and prepared to leave, Jake called out, Where can I reach you if I have questions? Stella May pointed toward the distant mountains. I'll be camping up in the hills. When you're ready to give me your answer, just ride up toward Eagle Peak and call my name. I'll hear you. Jake watched her disappear into the morning haze, his mind already churning with possibilities and concerns. The proposition was incredible, but it would mean betting everything on a partnership with a woman who was literally larger than life. Jake spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on his regular ranch duties, but his mind kept wandering back to Stella May's incredible offer. He mucked out stalls with unusual vigor, as if physical work could help him think more clearly. The familiar routine of caring for his animals provided some comfort, but every time he looked at the eviction notice pinned to his kitchen table, his stomach twisted with anxiety. Around noon, Mrs. Henderson drove up in her old pickup truck, a cloud of dust trailing behind her. She was carrying a casserole dish covered with a checkered towel, and her weathered face showed the kind of concern that only came from years of genuine friendship. "Thought you might need a good meal," she said, setting the dish on his porch table. "You've been looking mighty thin lately, and worry never filled anyone's belly." Jake accepted the food gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten anything since yesterday evening. As they sat together in the shade of his porch, Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes studied his face carefully. "Something's changed," she observed. "Yesterday you looked like a man facing the end of the world. Today you look confused but hopeful. What's happened?" Jake hesitated, unsure how to explain his encounter with Stella May without sounding completely insane. He settled for a vague version of the truth. "Someone approached me with a business proposition. It could solve my financial problems, but it would mean some big changes to the ranch." Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "What kind of changes? And who is this someone? I know most folks in 3 counties, and I can't think of anyone with that kind of money who'd be interested in helping you out of pure kindness." "That's part of what has me worried," Jake admitted. "The offer seems too good to be true, but at this point I'm not sure I have many other choices." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Jake's cattle graze in the distance. Mrs. Henderson had been ranching longer than Jake had been alive, and her wisdom had gotten him through many difficult decisions over the years. "My daddy used to say that when you're drowning, you don't get to be picky about who throws you the rope," she said finally. "But he also said to make sure you're not jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire." After Mrs. Henderson left, Jake saddled his horse and rode out to check on his herd. The familiar rhythm of his horse's gait and the vast expanse of Texas sky helped clear his head. As he watched his cattle, he tried to imagine the land transformed according to Stella May's vision. Giant cattle, enormous rodeo arenas, tourists from around the world. It seemed like something out of a fever dream. But the financial projections had looked real enough. If even half of what Stella May promised came to pass, he would not only save the ranch but become wealthy beyond his current dreams. The question was whether he could trust someone so extraordinary, so far outside his normal experience. That evening, Jake drove into town to visit his friend Tommy at the local diner. Tommy had grown up on the neighboring ranch and now worked as the town's unofficial historian and gossip central. If anyone would have information about mysterious visitors or unusual happenings, it would be Tommy. The diner was mostly empty except for a few regulars nursing coffee and pie. Tommy was behind the counter, wiping down glasses and keeping one eye on the small television mounted in the corner. His face lit up when he saw Jake walk in. "Well, if it isn't the infamous Jake Martinez," Tommy said with a grin. "I heard old Sheriff Williams had to deliver some bad news to you the other day. Sorry to hear about your troubles, buddy." Jake slid onto a bar stool and ordered coffee. "Tommy, have you heard anything unusual lately? Any strange visitors passing through town or folks asking questions about local ranches?" Tommy's expression grew curious. "Funny you should ask. Yesterday morning, Pete Morrison swore he saw someone riding a horse up in the hills, but he said the rider was enormous. Like giant-sized enormous. Of course, Pete's been known to sample his own moonshine, so most folks figured he was seeing things." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Anyone else mention seeing anything unusual?" "Come to think of it, Mary Goldstein called the sheriff's office to report what she thought was a meteorite landing up near Eagle Peak. But when Deputy Johnson went to investigate, he didn't find anything except some unusually large hoof prints that he couldn't explain." Jake tried to keep his expression neutral while his mind raced. The hoof prints were probably real evidence of Stella May's presence, which meant other people had at least glimpsed her, even if they didn't fully understand what they had seen. "Why the sudden interest in local mysteries?" Tommy asked. "You're not usually one for tall tales and strange stories." "Just curious," Jake replied. "With everything that's been happening, I guess I'm hoping for a miracle." Tommy's expression softened. "I hear you, man. If anyone deserves a break, it's you. Your family has been nothing but good to this community for generations." Jake finished his coffee and headed home, his mind more unsettled than ever. The fact that other people had noticed signs of Stella May's presence made her offer feel more real, but it also raised new questions. How long had she been in the area? What had brought her here specifically? And most importantly, could he really trust someone whose very existence seemed to defy logic? Back at the ranch, Jake sat on his porch and pulled out the architectural drawings Stella May had left with him. In the moonlight, he studied every detail, trying to understand exactly what she was proposing. The scale was breathtaking. Buildings that would dwarf anything in the county, equipment that would require specialized transportation, and infrastructure that would rival major theme parks. He found himself calculating the potential impact on his community. The construction alone would provide jobs for dozens of local workers. The ongoing operations would need staff, suppliers, and support services. If Stella May's business succeeded, it could revitalize the entire region's economy. But there were also potential downsides. Increased traffic, environmental concerns, and the possibility that the project might fail, leaving him worse off than before. Jake had never been a gambling man, but this felt like the biggest bet of his life. As the night grew deeper, Jake made a decision. He would ride up to Eagle Peak in the morning and ask Stella May for more details. Before he committed to anything, he needed to understand exactly how her operation would work, what guarantees she could provide, and what would happen if things went wrong. He also decided to do some research of his own. If Stella May was involved in the entertainment industry as she claimed, there might be records of her previous projects. The county library had internet access, and Jake planned to spend some time searching for any information about giant-themed tourist attractions or unusual entertainment ventures. Sleep came easier that night, not because Jake had found answers, but because he had a plan. Whatever Stella May's true nature and intentions, he would make his decision based on facts rather than desperation. His family's legacy deserved that much careful consideration. The morning would bring new conversations and hopefully new understanding. Jake fell asleep with his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. "Son, the biggest mistakes come from making decisions when you're scared, and the biggest regrets come from not making decisions when you're ready." Tomorrow, he would find out if he was ready to bet everything on a giant cowgirl's impossible dream. Jake spent the next day moving his cattle to the eastern pastures and preparing for whatever was about to happen on his land. As evening approached, he found himself sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the horizon for signs of the promised construction activity. Despite having signed the contracts and deposited Stella May's check, part of him still wondered if the whole experience had been an elaborate dream. Just after midnight, he got his answer. The ground began to vibrate with a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from deep underground. Looking toward the western section of his property, Jake saw lights approaching in the distance, not the headlights of normal vehicles, but enormous illumination that moved with purpose and coordination. The construction equipment that emerged from the darkness was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Massive earth movers the size of buildings rolled across his land with surprising grace, their engines so well muffled that the loudest sound was the gentle whisper of earth being moved and shaped. Behind them came trucks carrying steel beams and concrete sections that dwarfed anything used in human construction. Stella May appeared at his fence line just as the work was getting into full swing. Tonight she was dressed in work clothes, massive coveralls, and a hard hat that could have sheltered a small family from rain. Despite the industrial setting, she still managed to look elegant and commanding. "Impressive, isn't it?" she called out over the soft rumble of machinery. "My people have been perfecting these techniques for centuries." Jake walked closer, mesmerized by the precision of the operation. Workers who were clearly giants like Stella May moved with choreographed efficiency, each one knowing exactly what their role was in the massive undertaking. What struck him most was how carefully they worked around the existing landscape, preserving trees and natural features wherever possible. "How is it so quiet?" Jake asked. "Equipment this size should be deafening." "We learned long ago that stealth was essential for survival," Stella May explained. "Our engineers developed sound-dampening technology generations before humans invented similar systems." Over the next 2 weeks, Jake watched in amazement as an enormous arena complex took shape on his land. The main structure was a coliseum-like building that could have housed several football stadiums, but its design was so harmonious with the surrounding landscape that it seemed to grow naturally from the earth itself. Smaller buildings appeared around the main arena. What Stella May explained were guest facilities, equipment storage, and administrative offices. Everything was built to accommodate both giant-sized and human-sized visitors, with parallel systems that allowed the two groups to interact safely and comfortably. Jake's role during construction was to serve as liaison with any local authorities who might have questions. As Stella May had predicted, several county officials visited to inspect the work. but the permits and documentation were so thorough that they found nothing to object to. The project was officially described as a specialized equestrian entertainment facility, which was technically accurate even if it didn't convey the full scope of what was being built. Mrs. Henderson stopped by several times during the construction, her curiosity clearly aroused by the massive project. Jake managed to deflect most of her questions while giving her a tour of the publicly accessible areas. She was impressed by the quality of the construction and the obvious expense involved. Whoever your business partner is, they certainly don't do things halfway, she observed, watching a crew of workers who appeared to be normal-sized humans installing human-scale facilities. What she didn't realize was that these normal-sized workers were actually giants working at a distance, making them appear smaller through perspective. As the construction neared completion, Stella May introduced Jake to other members of her community. He met Marcus Ironforge, a giant blacksmith who had crafted much of the specialized equipment, and Eleanor Swiftwind, who would serve as the facility's operations manager. Each of them treated Jake with respect and genuine warmth, accepting him as a full partner rather than just a human curiosity. The cultural exchange worked both ways. Jake taught them about local customs, helped them understand human bureaucracy, and provided insights into what would appeal to human tourists. In return, he learned about giant society, their history, and their remarkable achievements in engineering and environmental harmony. "Your people are incredibly advanced," Jake observed during one of their planning sessions. "Why have you stayed hidden for so long?" Eleanor's expression grew serious. "Historical experience taught us to be cautious. Humans don't always react well to beings they perceive as different or potentially threatening. We've seen what happened to other minority groups throughout history. But you've decided it's worth the risk now?" "The world is changing," Marcus replied. "Communication technology, global travel, and shifting attitudes toward diversity have created opportunities that didn't exist before. We believe the time is right to begin careful integration." As opening day approached, Jake found himself genuinely excited about the venture. The facility was magnificent, combining cutting-edge technology with traditional craftsmanship. The main arena could host rodeo events featuring cattle and horses scaled to giant proportions, while smaller venues allowed human visitors to experience traditional-sized ranching activities. The first group of tourists was scheduled to arrive in 3 days. They were carefully selected individuals who had been vetted for their discretion and open-mindedness. If the initial trials went well, Stella May planned to gradually expand the program and eventually open to the general public. Jake's role would be to serve as host and cultural interpreter, helping human visitors understand giant customs, while ensuring that his new partners felt comfortable interacting with human guests. It was a responsibility he took seriously, knowing that the success of the venture depended on building trust and understanding between two very different communities. The night before opening day, Jake stood at the edge of the arena, looking up at the stars through the retractable roof that allowed for both indoor and outdoor events. The scale of everything around him still took his breath away, but it no longer seemed impossible or frightening. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something truly extraordinary. Stella May joined him, her massive frame somehow managing to seem companionable rather than intimidating in the moonlight. "Any second thoughts?" she asked gently. Jake considered the question seriously before answering. "Plenty of nervous thoughts, but no regrets. This is either going to be the best decision my family ever made, or the most interesting failure in ranching history." Stella May laughed. "I appreciate your honesty. For what it's worth, I think we're going to make history in the best possible way." As they stood together under the vast Texas sky, human and giant united in a shared vision of the future, Jake felt his great-grandfather's spirit nodding in approval. The old rancher had always said that fortune favored the bold, and this partnership was certainly the boldest thing the Martinez family had ever attempted. Tomorrow would bring the first test of their extraordinary collaboration. Tonight was for hope, anticipation, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most impossible dreams were the ones worth pursuing. Jake spent a restless night walking through his house, touching the worn furniture and faded photographs that represented 4 generations of his family's life on the ranch. In the kitchen, his great-grandmother's cast-iron skillet still hung on its hook, seasoned black from decades of use. The living room walls were covered with pictures of Martinez men and women standing proudly beside prize-winning cattle, their faces weathered by sun and wind but always showing the quiet satisfaction of honest work. By morning, Jake had made his decision. As the sun rose over the eastern hills, he saddled Luna once again and rode toward Eagle Peak. This time, he carried a small leather portfolio containing his own family's ranch records, financial documents, and legal papers. If he was going to enter into a partnership with Stella May, he wanted everything to be transparent from the beginning. He found her breaking camp with impressive efficiency. Despite the enormous size of her equipment, she moved with practiced grace, securing everything with the skill of someone who had spent years traveling. Her massive horse stood patiently as she loaded the giant saddlebags that could have served as storage sheds for a regular-sized person. "Morning, Jake," she called out cheerfully. "You're up early. I'm guessing that means you've made your decision." Jake dismounted and walked closer, feeling dwarfed by her presence but no longer intimidated. "I have. Before I give you my answer, though, I want to show you something." He pulled out his portfolio and opened it on a boulder between them. "These are my family's records going back to when my great-grandfather first settled this land. I want you to understand what you're asking me to risk, and what it would mean to me if this partnership fails." Stella May knelt down carefully, bringing her enormous frame closer to Jake's level so she could examine the documents. Her expression grew thoughtful as she studied the old photographs, land deeds, and handwritten records of cattle sales and weather patterns spanning nearly a century. "Your great-grandfather started with nothing," she observed, pointing to an early photograph showing a young man standing beside a modest wooden shack. "Look how he built this into something substantial through sheer determination." "That's exactly what I've been thinking about," Jake replied. "He took enormous risks to build a better life for his family. My grandfather expanded the ranch during the Great Depression when everyone said he was crazy. My father modernized the operation in the 1980s when cattle prices were at rock bottom." He pointed to the most recent financial records. "Every generation of my family has faced seemingly impossible challenges and found ways to overcome them. The difference is they were betting on their own abilities and their knowledge of ranching. You're asking me to bet on something completely outside my experience." Stella May studied his face carefully. "And what conclusion have you reached?" Jake took a deep breath. "I'm saying yes, but I have conditions." Relief and excitement flashed across Stella May's features, but she remained composed. "Name them. First, I want a trial period. 6 months to see if this partnership works for both of us, with either party able to withdraw without penalty." "Agreed. Second, I want regular communication with your people. If I'm going to be a bridge between your community and mine, I need to understand both sides." Stella May nodded. "That's actually essential for success. You'll meet several of my colleagues during the construction phase. Third, I want guarantees about environmental protection. This land has sustained my family for generations, and I won't be part of anything that damages it permanently." "Absolutely. Our construction methods are actually more environmentally friendly than human techniques. We work with the land rather than against it." Jake pulled out his final condition, the one he had spent the most time considering. "And finally, I want the option to purchase a share of the business itself, not just collect lease payments. If this succeeds the way you project, I want my family to be genuine partners, not just landlords." Stella May's smile grew broader. "Jake Martinez, you continue to impress me. That's exactly the kind of long-term thinking I was hoping for." She stood up and extended her enormous hand. "Partners." Jake reached up and shook her hand, his own completely dwarfed by her massive fingers. "Partners." The next few hours were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Stella May produced contracts that had clearly been prepared in advance, incorporating all of Jake's conditions with remarkable detail. She explained that her people had extensive experience with legal agreements and had anticipated most of the concerns human partners might raise. As they worked through the paperwork, Jake learned more about the logistics of Stella May's operation. The construction would begin with massive earth-moving equipment that would arrive during the night and work in shifts to avoid detection. The building materials would be transported by specialized vehicles that could handle the enormous scale of the project. "What about permits and inspections?" Jake asked. "The county is going to want to know what's being built on my land." We have people who handle regulatory affairs, Stella May replied. They're experts at working within human legal systems while protecting our community's privacy. The paperwork will all be in order, though some of the technical specifications might be creatively described. By midday, all the contracts were signed and sealed. Stella May produced a check for the first lease payment that made Jake's eyes water. It was enough to pay off all his debts, cover the back rent, and leave him with more money in the bank than he had ever imagined having. Construction begins tomorrow night, Stella May announced. You'll want to move your cattle to the eastern pastures for safety. The work will be noisy, but it should be completed within 2 weeks. Jake felt a mixture of excitement and terror as the reality of what he had committed to began to sink in. What do I tell my neighbors when they start asking questions? Tell them you've leased part of your land for a specialized entertainment facility. That's the truth, just not the complete truth. Most humans find it easier to accept gradual revelations rather than immediate full disclosure. As Stella May prepared to leave, she handed Jake a communication device that looked like a regular walkie-talkie, but was clearly built to much more robust specifications. If you need to reach me during construction, use this. I'll be supervising the work personally. She mounted her enormous horse and looked down at Jake with genuine warmth. Thank you for trusting me, Jake. I promise you won't regret this decision. Jake watched her ride away, disappearing into the afternoon haze like something out of a legend. Then he looked down at the check in his hand and realized that his life had just changed forever. That evening, he drove into town to deposit the check, trying to act casual despite the extraordinary amount. The bank teller's eyes widened when she saw the figure, but she processed the transaction without comment. Small-town discretion was a valuable trait, and Jake was grateful for it. On his way home, he stopped by Mrs. Henderson's house to share the news of his good fortune, though he kept the details vague. Her relief and happiness were genuine, and she insisted on opening a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. I knew something good was going to happen for you, she said, raising her glass in a toast. Your family deserves this kind of luck. As Jake sat on his porch that night, looking out over his land and thinking about the changes that would begin tomorrow, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. For the first time in months, the future looked bright with possibility rather than dark with worry. His great-grandfather's spirit would approve, Jake thought. The old man had never been afraid to take calculated risks in pursuit of a better life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, Jake Martinez was a man with hope restored and a partnership that might just change everything. Jake woke before dawn, his mind already racing with questions for Stella May. He dressed quickly and headed to the county library as soon as it opened, determined to research her claims before making any decisions. The elderly librarian, Miss Patricia, greeted him with surprise. Jake wasn't known for his frequent visits to the computer terminals. Research project? She asked kindly, leading him to one of the public computers. Something like that, Jake replied, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair. He spent the next 3 hours searching for any information about giant-themed entertainment venues, unusual tourist attractions, and anything related to someone named Stella May Bronson. The results were frustrating. He found plenty of information about regular-sized dude ranches and adventure tourism, but nothing that matched what Stella May had described. However, he did discover several news articles about mysterious large-scale construction projects that had appeared overnight in remote locations, only to disappear just as quickly. One article from Montana described enormous concrete foundations that had been found in a mountain valley, with no record of permits or construction crews. Another from Nevada mentioned strange geometric patterns visible from satellite images that resembled arena layouts but were far too large for any known purpose. The articles were scattered across different years and regions, but they painted a picture of someone or something operating on a massive scale while avoiding official oversight. Jake felt a chill as he realized that Stella May might be far more than just an unusual business partner. She might be part of something much larger and more mysterious. After leaving the library, Jake stopped by the hardware store to pick up some supplies and casually asked the owner, Bill Reynolds, if he had heard about any large construction projects being planned in the area. Funny you should ask, Bill said, scratching his gray beard. I've had some unusual orders lately. Someone called yesterday wanting to know if I could special order massive amounts of specialized concrete, steel cables, and industrial-grade lighting equipment. When I asked what it was for, they said it was for a private entertainment facility. Jake's pulse quickened. Did they leave a name or contact information? Said they'd call back with details. The voice was strange, though, real deep and powerful, like it was coming from someone with a lot of authority. Honestly, it made me a little nervous. Jake thanked Bill and headed home, his mind churning with new concerns. The evidence suggested that Stella May was already moving forward with her plans, possibly without waiting for his agreement. That level of confidence was either very reassuring or very troubling, depending on how he looked at it. Back at the ranch, Jake saddled his best horse, a steady mare named Luna, and began the ride toward Eagle Peak. The trail wound upward through scrub brush and rocky terrain, climbing steadily toward the distant summit. As he rode, Jake rehearsed the questions he wanted to ask Stella May about her background, her previous projects, and the legal implications of their potential partnership. About halfway up the mountain, he began to smell smoke from a campfire. Following the scent, he soon came upon a sight that took his breath away. Stella May had set up what could only be described as a giant's camp. Her tent was the size of a barn, constructed from what appeared to be the finest canvas and supported by poles that must have been entire tree trunks. A massive campfire crackled in a stone circle that could have served as a small amphitheater. Cooking equipment scaled to match Stella May's size was arranged neatly around the fire, and her enormous horse grazed contentedly in a nearby meadow that had been temporarily fenced with rope thick as Jake's wrist. Stella May herself was sitting on a boulder that served as a chair, reading what looked like a newspaper but was clearly printed on paper the size of a movie poster. She looked up as Jake approached, a warm smile crossing her beautiful features. "Jake," she called out cheerfully. "I was hoping you'd come up to visit. I've got coffee brewing, though I'm afraid my cups might be a bit large for you." Jake dismounted and approached cautiously, still awed by the scale of everything around him. "I have to admit, I'm impressed by your setup here, and I have a lot of questions about your proposal." "I figured you might," Stella May replied, setting down her enormous newspaper. "Have a seat and ask away. I believe in being completely honest with potential partners." Jake found a smaller boulder to sit on and looked directly into her green eyes. "First question, who are you really? I've been doing research and I can't find any record of Stella May Bronson or the kind of business you're describing." Stella May nodded approvingly. "Smart man. You're right to be cautious." She poured coffee into a cup the size of a small bucket and set it where Jake could reach it. "The truth is, I'm part of a community that most people don't know exists. We're what you might call giants, though we prefer to think of ourselves as simply people who happen to be larger than the average human." She gestured toward the vast landscape spread out below them. "My people have been living quietly in remote places for centuries, staying out of human affairs for the most part. But times are changing, and some of us believe it's time to bridge the gap between our communities." Jake sipped the coffee, which was excellent despite being served in an oversized cup. "Are you saying there are more people like you?" "Quite a few, actually. We have our own towns, our own businesses, our own culture. But we've reached a point where isolation isn't sustainable anymore. We need to establish legitimate relationships with human communities, and tourism seems like the most natural way to do that." The explanation was so matter-of-fact that Jake found himself believing it, despite its extraordinary nature. "Why choose my ranch specifically? Surely there are other locations that would work just as well." Stella May's expression grew more serious. "Location is part of it. You're in a remote area but still accessible to major cities. But the main reason is you, Jake. I've been watching your community for months, learning about the people and their character. Your family has a reputation for integrity, hard work, and treating people fairly. Those qualities are essential for the kind of partnership I'm proposing." Jake felt a mixture of pride and unease at the thought that he had been under observation without knowing it. What exactly would this partnership involve on a day-to-day basis? "You would continue running your regular ranch operations, but you'd also serve as my liaison with the human community," Stella May explained. "You'd help hire local workers, manage relationships with suppliers and authorities, and assist with the regular-sized aspects of the business. In return, you'd receive a substantial lease payment plus a percentage of the profits." She pulled out another set of documents from her seemingly bottomless saddlebags. "These are more detailed financial projections, including conservative estimates of what your share would be worth." Jake studied the numbers, his eyes widening as he realized the potential income was even greater than he had initially thought. If Stella May's projections were accurate, he would earn more in 1 year than his family had made in the previous 10 years combined. "This seems incredible," he said honestly. "But what happens if it doesn't work? What if people aren't interested? Or if there are legal problems, or if something goes wrong?" Stella May appreciated his practical concerns. "I've included provisions for those possibilities in the contract. If the business fails for any reason beyond your control, you keep all lease payments already made. Plus, I'll provide enough additional compensation to cover your debts and give you a fresh start." She leaned forward slightly, her massive frame somehow managing to seem less intimidating and more friendly. "Jake, I understand this is a huge leap of faith, but I'm not asking you to risk everything on a wild dream. I'm offering you a partnership that protects your interests, while giving you the opportunity to be part of something revolutionary." Jake looked out over the valley where his ranch lay spread out like a miniature model. From this height, his problems seemed smaller and more manageable. The perspective shift made him realize that he had been thinking too narrowly about his options. "I need to ask you something important," Jake said finally. "Are you and your people peaceful? I mean, humans have a complicated history with beings we don't understand." Stella May's laugh was warm and genuine. "We're probably more peaceful than most humans, to be honest. We've survived by avoiding conflict, not by seeking it. The last thing we want is trouble with your authorities or your community." She stood up, her massive frame silhouetted against the afternoon sky. "I'll give you 1 more day to think it over, Jake. But I want you to know that regardless of your decision, I respect your thoroughness and your concern for your family's legacy." As Jake rode back down the mountain, his mind was clearer than it had been in months. The conversation had answered many of his questions and raised new ones. But most importantly, it had given him a sense of Stella May's character. Whether she was human or giant or something else entirely, she seemed to be someone who kept her word and honored her commitments. The evening sun cast long shadows across his ranch as he approached the house. Tomorrow he would make his decision. Tonight he would spend time with his memories of 4 generations of Martinez ranchers and ask himself what they would have done in his situation. Opening day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and new possibilities across the ranch. Jake woke early, his stomach churning with nervous excitement as he prepared for the arrival of their first guests. He dressed in his best Western wear, clean jeans, polished boots, and the silver belt buckle his grandfather had worn to cattle shows. The first group of visitors arrived in a convoy of luxury vehicles, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity, skepticism, and anticipation. Jake had studied their profiles carefully. They included adventure tourism entrepreneurs from Colorado, entertainment industry executives from Los Angeles, and wealthy thrill seekers from Texas and New York. All had signed extensive confidentiality agreements and paid substantial deposits for the privilege of experiencing something unprecedented. Stella May greeted the guests personally, appearing at the main entrance in full ceremonial Western wear that had clearly been crafted by master artisans. Her outfit was a work of art, hand-tooled leather decorated with intricate silverwork and precious stones that caught the morning sunlight. Despite her imposing size, her manner was gracious and welcoming. "Welcome to Bronson Ranch Experience," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the gathering without seeming overwhelming. "I'm Stella May Bronson, your host for what I promise will be an unforgettable adventure." Jake watched the guests' faces as they processed their first close encounter with a giant. Some looked awestruck, others appeared nervous, but all seemed genuinely intrigued by what they were experiencing. The careful selection process had worked. These were people prepared to embrace something extraordinary. The tour began with the guest facilities, which had been designed to accommodate both human and giant visitors simultaneously. Jake served as cultural interpreter, explaining the history of the ranch and the vision behind the partnership, while Stella May demonstrated the unique features of the facility. The main arena was the centerpiece of the experience. When the massive doors opened to reveal the enormous space inside, several guests gasped audibly. The arena floor was larger than most professional sports stadiums, with seating areas scaled for both giant and human spectators. In the center, a herd of giant-sized cattle grazed peacefully, each animal the size of a small building but clearly docile and well-trained. "These cattle are bred specifically for our programs," Stella May explained. They're gentle giants carefully selected for temperament and trained from birth to work with both giant and human handlers. The first activity was a demonstration rodeo featuring giant cowboys performing traditional events on an enormous scale. Jake found himself holding his breath as riders mounted horses the size of elephants and attempted to rope cattle that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. The skill and athleticism required were breathtaking, and the guests watched in amazed silence. Next came the interactive portion of the program. Guests were invited to participate in scaled-down versions of ranching activities, working alongside human-sized staff to move regular cattle through specially designed courses. The contrast between the giant-scale and human-scale activities was remarkable, giving visitors a unique perspective on the relationship between size and skill. Jake's favorite part of the day was the cultural exchange session, where guests could ask questions about giant society, while Stella May and her colleagues learned about human customs and perspectives. The conversations were fascinating, revealing similarities and differences between the two communities that no one had anticipated. One guest, a documentary filmmaker from Austin, was particularly intrigued by the historical aspects of giant human relations. "How long have your people been aware of human civilization?" she asked. Eleanor Swiftwind, who was serving as historical consultant for the day, smiled thoughtfully. "We've been watching and occasionally interacting with humans for thousands of years. Many of your legends about giants are based on real encounters, though the stories have been embellished over time." By the end of the day, the guests were visibly transformed by their experience. Several were already making inquiries about return visits and asking about bringing family members or business associates. The documentary filmmaker had received permission to create a carefully controlled film about the facility, which could provide invaluable publicity for future marketing efforts. As the visitors departed, Jake felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The day had exceeded his most optimistic expectations, and the guests' enthusiasm suggested that Stella May's vision of giant human tourism was not only viable, but potentially revolutionary. That evening, Jake and Stella May sat on his porch, sharing a bottle of wine and reflecting on the day's success. The familiar sounds of the ranch at evening surrounded them, cattle settling for the night, crickets beginning their symphony, and the gentle whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. "You were right," Jake said, raising his glass in a toast. "This is going to change everything." Stella May smiled, her enormous wine glass catching the last rays of sunlight. "It already has. Do you realize what we accomplished today? We proved that two very different communities can work together to create something neither could achieve alone." Over the following months, the Bronson Ranch experience became a carefully guarded secret among adventure tourism circles. Word-of-mouth recommendations brought a steady stream of visitors, each group larger and more diverse than the last. The facility expanded to include overnight accommodations, specialized workshops, and seasonal events that showcased different aspects of giant culture. Jake's role evolved from simple liaison to full partner in the enterprise. He developed educational programs about traditional ranching, created cultural exchange initiatives, and eventually began training other human staff to work with giant colleagues. His financial situation transformed completely. Not only were his debts paid off, but he was building wealth at a rate that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. More importantly, Jake had found a sense of purpose that went far beyond simple survival. He was part of something groundbreaking, helping to bridge two worlds and create understanding where none had existed before. The ranch that had nearly been lost to debt was now the foundation of an enterprise that might change how different communities related to each other around the world. Mrs. Henderson, who had eventually been brought into the circle of trust, became one of the facility's most popular cultural ambassadors. Her natural warmth and storytelling ability made her perfect for helping visitors understand the human side of the partnership. "Who would have thought," she said during one of their planning meetings, "that the answer to Jake's rent problems would turn out to be a giant cowgirl with a vision for the future?" Jake looked around the table at his colleagues, human and giant working together as equals, planning innovations that would benefit both communities. The eviction notice that had once seemed like the end of his world was now framed on his office wall as a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change when people were willing to take risks for something greater than themselves. As the sun set over the ranch on the anniversary of his first meeting with Stella May, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The scared, desperate man who had received that eviction notice was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the greatest opportunities often came disguised as impossible challenges. The giant cowgirl's question about affording his rent had led to discoveries about courage, partnership, and the power of believing in something extraordinary. Jake Martinez had not only saved his family's ranch, he had helped create a new model for how different worlds could come together in harmony and mutual respect. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that a year ago would have seemed like pure fantasy. But Jake had learned that sometimes the most fantastic dreams were simply waiting for someone brave enough to say yes when opportunity knocked. Even if it arrived in the form of a 12-foot-tall cowgirl with a smile and an impossible proposition.